Chapter 5, Accidentally Shot, covering the years 1923 to 1924. William Branham spent his 14th summer, 1923, helping his father tend the garden and work the field. Charles had 2 horses on the place, one old plow horse that he owned and one younger horse borrowed from Mr. Wathan. Since he had 2 single-sweep, mold-board plows, Charles always ran both plows at the same time. In June, Billy and his father were plowing between rows of corn when the horses started snorting and stomping their feet nervously. Billy struggled to keep his horse between the rows so that the mold-board plow would not wander into the corn stalks. He hollered, "Papa, what's the matter with this horse?" Charles' horse was dancing too. He stopped, mopped his brow with his red and white checkered handkerchief, and studied the horizon. "Son, there's comin' a storm." Billy peered at the clear blue skyline. "Storm? I don't see no storm, Papa." "Son, you don't understand. God is giving these horses an instinct. They can smell that storm way away." They began plowing again, but didn't get further than 2 more rows when dark clouds topped the horizon. They just had time to get the horses back to the barn before the squall let loose. Billy rarely thought about God, for the subject seldom came up in household conversation. But he thought about him that day, and he wondered what other shrewd instincts God might have put into animals. Thinking about all the marvelous things he had seen among the creatures of the woods, Billy decided that God must be a pretty clever fellow. One Saturday morning, Billy asked if he could go into town for the day. Charles paid him a dime for helping him all week, saying, "Don't spend it all in one place, son." Hitchhiking into Jeffersonville, Billy went to the house of his cousin, Jimmy Poole. Then he, Jimmy, and Ernest Fisher strolled downtown to spend their money. Billy fingered the dime in his pocket as he walked. He felt so rich. First, he bought an ice cream cone for a penny. After he had eaten that one, he bought and ate 2 more. Then he went into Schimpf's candy store and ogled at the row upon rows of glass jars filled with hard candies. Billy had been here before, and he knew what he liked best. He paid 2 cents for half of a pound of Red Hots. That left him a nickel, just enough for the double feature at Leo's Theater. After watching Western movies for hours, Billy had fantasies about living out west and being a hero on a dude ranch. The height of his youthful ambition was to be a real cowboy, with chaps and boots and a 10-gallon hat, and an ornery horse that nobody else could ride but him. He often heard his father talk about how, when he was younger, he had broken wild broncos and entered rodeos from Kentucky to Texas. Billy thought, "Oh my! When I get just a little older, I'm going to go out west and be a real rider." Billy practiced on the old plow horse. When he and his father spent a day in the field, Billy always came home early to do the chores. He led his tired nag behind the barn to a water trough made from a hollowed-out log. The horse plunged his muzzle through the slime, sucking in draughts of water, while Billy undid the harness and carried it into the barn. Bees hummed above the water trough. Billy's younger brothers gathered around. They had taken the hairs that combed out of the horse's mane and tail and had braided these into a horsehair snake, which they floated in the trough. When the horse's drinking made waves, the horsehair snake rippled like a slithering copperhead on top of the water. Billy lugged a saddle from the barn and slapped it on the horse's back. Cockleburs grew thick around the water trough, and Billy gathered a handful of the prickly heads and stuffed them under the saddle before he cinched it tight. His brothers lined up on the fence for the show. Jumping on the horse's back, Billy jabbed his heels into its flanks, trying to get it to buck. The poor old horse, tired from working all day, just bawled and turned around, scarcely lifting its hoofs off the ground. Billy rocked back and forth in the saddle, pretending his horse was a fierce, bucking bronco. He hollered, "Look at me! I'm a cowboy," as he slapped the horse on the rump with his straw hat. All his brothers laughed and clapped their hands. That fall, after the crops were harvested, Billy spent more and more time in the woods, fishing and hunting with his coon dog Fritz. Billy loved his dog and boasted Fritz could tree any critter that climbed. Not even a skunk could discourage his dog's faithfulness. Fritz would chase a skunk into a pile of brush, then circle the pile, barking to keep the skunk put. When Billy caught up, all he had to do was raise the pile of brush and say, "Sick him, boy." Without any hesitation, Fritz would plunge in and nab the skunk, ignoring the awful smell that sprayed at him. Naturally, Billy's mother disapproved of this practice. Hunting and fishing became more of a pastime for Billy. His hours in the woods became a refuge from the outside world, an interlude of peace in a life otherwise squeezed too tightly by unbearable circumstances. In the forest, Billy no longer felt like an outcast. He felt like he was part of the wildlife, part of the rhythm of the seasons, part of the natural order of the universe. He felt like he belonged. Billy began to wander farther from home, and in doing so discovered Tunnel Mill, a rural area about 15 miles northeast of Jeffersonville near Charlestown, Indiana. The area drew its name from a remarkable flour mill that sat next to 14 Mile Creek. In the early 1800s, a man named John Work was looking for a good location to build a mill. It was not easy to find the perfect spot. The water needed to run with enough speed and volume to turn the mill's giant water wheel as many months of the year as possible. John Work noticed that at one point, 14 Mile Creek wrapped almost completely around a big hill of rock, dropping 24 feet in the process. Shrewdly, he calculated that if he built his mill on the downstream side of the hill and dynamited a tunnel directly through the rock bluff to the upstream side, the steep drop through the tunnel would be all the power his water wheel would ever need. The mill and tunnel were completed in 1820 and gained for the area the appropriate name of Tunnel Mill. 30 years later, John Work's son sold the flour mill to Wilford Green, whose family had operated it ever since. That's why sometimes the area was also called Green's Mill by the local residents. Isolated from civilization, the Tunnel Mill area teemed with fish, deer, opossums, skunks, raccoons, muskrats, beavers, squirrels, trees, hills, rocks, streams, quiet and serenity. In short, everything that Billy wanted in his life. He went there often, catching rides on the delivery trucks that shuttled between Charlestown and Jeffersonville. Sometimes he could convince his two buddies, Jimmy Poole and Sam Adair, to go there with him. Sometimes he would take Edward and Henry. Usually they would sleep in an abandoned ranger cabin, and they would always catch their breakfast right from the stream. At one place, 14 Mile Creek ran 10 feet deep and 40 feet wide, forming a perfect swimming hole. Billy dubbed this spot the Beaver Hole. He packed in a long coil of rope and tied it to a tree limb that stretched out over the water. From the bank they would swing a wide arc out over the stream. Then they would let go. That rope gave the boys countless hours of fun. When he couldn't get someone to go with him, Billy hitchhiked up to Tunnel Mill by himself. He would spend days hunting and fishing and exploring the rugged woodlands. During one of these ramblings, he accidentally discovered his future hideaway. Coming around the side of a hill, he found himself at the base of a limestone cliff. Below him, the land sloped sharply down into a ravine about 80 feet deep. The whole area was heavily wooded and strewn with big limestone boulders that had fallen from the cliffs above. Billy was picking his way carefully along the base of the cliff when he noticed a 2-foot-wide hole at his feet, almost completely hidden by the dense underbrush. At first, he assumed it must be a fox den, a crack between the rocks that sheltered animals from the weather. But a closer inspection showed him it was the mouth of a cave. Billy wiggled into the opening feet first. The hole went down about 3 feet, and from there the floor sloped downward and back into the hill until it formed a narrow passageway that was tall enough to allow him to stand. The air was cool and moist. Billy groped his way along the corridor for a short distance until he got scared. What if he should stumble into a pit? He dared not go too far into the darkness now. He would come back later, better prepared. The next time Billy was in the area, he brought with him some candles so that he could explore farther back into his cave. He wiggled through the opening and skidded down the slippery incline to the first place where he could stand up. The corridor was only about 18 inches wide. Although the walls were roughly perpendicular, The shadows caused by his flickering candlelight accentuated the many angles of the limestone interior. The passageway jogged slightly to the right and widened out a bit. Here the floor and ceiling were both reasonably level, as if this part of the cave was made for human habitation. There was even a flat ledge jutting out from one wall that was the right size for a bed. After another 12 feet, the corridor narrowed again. The floor and ceiling became uneven. The ceiling was crammed with angular chunks of limestone, tightly wedged, but giving the illusion that they might fall at any moment. By now he had come about 25 feet from the entrance. Suddenly he stopped and whistled in amazement. In front of him the cave widened out into a small room. In the center of the chamber sat a table formed from a single massive chunk of limestone. The table was a rectangular block about 3 feet high, 3 feet wide, and 4 feet long. The top of the table looked remarkably flat and level, and the 4 edges looked perfectly square. But the most striking feature in the room was a sharp, 3-sided rock that jutted down from the ceiling like an inverted pyramid. This stone hung directly over the table. The point of the pyramid poised just inches above the table's surface. Billy felt pleased with his find. It seemed to be a perfect hideout. He decided not to show it to his brothers or his buddies. This would be his own special secret. When he left the cave, he camouflaged the opening so that no other hiker or hunter would accidentally discover it. These were the better times of his youth, the good memories, tramping the woods, sleeping under the stars, fishing for his breakfast, hunting for his supper with his .22 rifle. Billy's marksmanship improved until he could shoot squirrels at 50 yards and every time hit them right between the eyes. In fact, it became a matter of sportsmanship with him that unless a squirrel looked in his direction, he wouldn't pull the trigger. And he became no less skilled with the shotgun, easily dropping any game bird in mid-flight. One evening in the fall of 1923, 14-year-old Billy was walking home with his cousin, Jimmy Poole. The two had been bird hunting that afternoon, but now their thoughts were elsewhere, joking, laughing, and jostling one another. Unfortunately, Jimmy had neglected to unload his shotgun. Suddenly the shot went off, blasting into Billy's legs at close range. Billy collapsed, shrieking in pain. Jimmy dropped to his knees, babbling, "I'm sorry, Billy, I'm so sorry. It was an accident. I didn't mean to." Then he got a good look at his friend's legs. Jimmy's face turned white. "Billy, don't try to move. I'll go for help." "No, don't leave me," Billy screamed, but Jimmy was already running like a jackrabbit. When Billy looked down at his legs, he was horrified to see that they were almost blown in two. He flopped his head back on the ground and shook with fear. "God, have mercy on me," he groaned. "You know I never did." Then he stopped, trying to think of something good about his life, something that might influence God to have mercy on him. The only thing he could think of was, "God, have mercy on me. You know I never did commit adultery." Soon Jimmy was back with a neighbor, Frankie Eich, who drove Billy to Clark County Memorial Hospital. Billy screamed in agony while the nurses cut off big chunks of flesh with scissors and cleaned the gaping wounds as best they could. Mr. Eich held Billy's hand. When the nurses finished, they had to pry Billy's fingers free from Mr. Eich's wrists. An X-ray revealed buckshot lying so close on either side of the arteries that one small scratch could cut the veins and Billy would start bleeding. These were the days before blood transfusions. If Billy lost too much blood, it would be fatal. That night Billy slept fitfully, at times only whimpering, at other times moaning from the pain. Sometime past midnight he woke to a splashing noise. Feeling down by his mangled legs, his hand dipped into a pool of blood. He rang the bell for the nurses, but the only thing they could do was soak up the blood with towels and wrap the bandages a little tighter. The next morning the nurses wheeled Billy into the operating room and gave him ether to put him out. Dr. Reeder did what he could to repair the damage, but because Billy was so weak, the doctor did not think the boy would make it. Besides Billy's mother and father, two ladies stood by him through this ordeal. Mrs. Stewart, a friend of the family, and Mrs. Roeder, whose husband was superintendent at the local car works. Billy slept for 8 hours under the anesthetic. When he finally opened his eyes, he saw Mrs. Roeder sitting next to his bed, crying because he was so close to death. He drifted back into sleep, and in the next hour fell in and out of consciousness several times. Then something happened, something like a dream, but more vivid than a dream, window glass clear, like he was actually there. And in this awareness he sensed he was falling through wispy clouds into a dark eternity, sinking down, down, down. There seemed to be no foundation to his world, nothing to stop his fall. He screamed, "Papa!" The words seemed flat and lifeless. "Mama!" he screamed. "Mama!" His mother wasn't there. "God!" he screamed, "Catch me!" His pitiful cries sounded hollow in the vast emptiness. Was the darkness unending? Had he passed beyond the realm of earth, beyond the reach of God? Maybe he would keep falling like this forever. Terror gripped him. Then faintly, ever so faintly, he heard noises, spooky moaning noises. As he fell, the sounds grew louder until they were all around him, groans and grunts. Now faces appeared in the darkness, women's faces, hideous faces with green canker sores around their eyes and twisted mouths, groaning, "Oh, oh, oh, oh." Billy cried out, "Oh, God, have mercy on me, have mercy. If you'll only let me go back and live, I promise you I'll be a good boy." In an instant he was back in the hospital room, his blurred vision focusing on his mother's dark, deep-set eyes. Her face brightened, and she hugged her son, weeping, "Oh, Billy, Billy, we thought you were dead. Thank God you're alive." Alive, yes, but barely. There was no penicillin available in those days, and the savage wounds burned red with infection. His stay in the hospital stretched into weeks. The Branhams had no money for hospital bills, so Mrs. Roeder mounted a charity drive on Billy's behalf. Between her church aid society, the Masons, the Ku Klux Klan, and private donations, all the medical expenses were eventually paid in full. Finally, the doctors said Billy had improved enough to go home. Unfortunately, his ordeal was a long way from over. At home, he was still bedridden. Months passed, and his legs did not get any better. Billy tossed on his straw-tick mattress through many dark and painful hours, thinking about that strange experience where he had been sinking into such a dreadful darkness. It had seemed so real, so vivid. Where had he been? The doctors had later told him about his physical condition at the time. His pulse had been dropping steadily, so that they were sure he was dying. Billy wondered if he could have been falling into hell. It bothered him. He thought, "Oh, let it be that I'll never go to a place like that. Let it be that no other human being will ever have to go to a place like that." Then he thought about what he had promised God. "If you'll only let me live, I promise I'll be a good boy." What did it mean to be a good boy? And who was God anyway? The whole experience puzzled him. As the frigid winter warmed into the spring of 1924, it became apparent that Billy's wounds were getting worse, not better. His calves had swollen to twice their normal size and had doubled back to his thighs so that he couldn't straighten out his legs. Dr. Reeder diagnosed his condition as blood poisoning, caused from the debris that was left in his wounds. Again, Billy's life hung in jeopardy. The doctor recommended that both his legs be amputated at the hips. Billy could not bear the thought of losing his legs. How could he hunt and tramp the woods? He might as well be dead. With absolute determination, he refused to have his legs amputated, saying tearfully, "No, doctor, just come up higher and take them off up here." And with his hand he drew a line across his neck. "There is a chance you could make it, even if we don't amputate," Dr. Reeder replied. "We could go in and try to clean the foreign material out of the wounds. It's a small chance, but it might work." This was a small chance Billy was willing to take. So, 7 months after his shotgun accident, Billy again lay on the operating table. Dr. Reeder and Dr. Pearl, a specialist from Louisville, reopened his wounds and carefully searched through the flesh, picking out the bits of greasy hunting clothes, flecks of shotgun wads, and as much lead buckshot as they could find. Then they sutured the incisions closed and hoped for the best. Billy slept many hours under the anesthesia. Coming out from limbo into the bright lights of consciousness, Billy had another striking experience, every bit as vivid and real as the previous one, but very different. This time he knew he was wide awake because he was lying on the hospital bed looking directly at his father. The hospital room blurred, and suddenly he seemed to be standing out west on a prairie. Cactus and bunch grass grew in every direction, all the way to the horizon. A huge golden cross hung in the sky in front of him, glowing like the sun and throwing out beams of light. As Billy raised his hand towards the emblem, some of those beams of light seemed to flow directly into his chest. Then the experience ended. Billy found himself back in the hospital room looking at his father. The operation was a success.